it lands on you, right? Do you know how hard it is on the internet to find a picture of a cat smiling? It's almost impossible. A strong family life. Raphael Pick, father of 16, says, a strong family life is the solution to all of our society's problems. I mean, in the end, where are your kids going to get the wherewithal to cope? At home. You don't want them to get it anywhere else. They need to get it from you. So, if you want them to bring their friends home when they're teenagers, home has to be an enjoyable place. If your home is not enjoyable, your kids won't want to bring their friends home. And you'll be in the situation where they're living a social life and you're not welcome. And that's a disaster. Big issue. It doesn't always mean that if your kids bring their friends home that everything's rosy, but at least you're in the game, you can talk about it, etc. That's an obvious one, the thing of peer group. And you've probably heard this, but they asked a guy when he turned 100, what's the best thing about being 100? No peer pressure. And there are two big topics at the end of this now. Two big topics. The first one is how effectively do you deal with your children on the topic of education and relationships and sex education. In our society now, I don't know, maybe in another time, another place, another village, maybe you could get away with talking to your kids less about these things. But everything is in their face now. And if you don't get in there first with the full story, the beautiful full story, that it's more than the biology, mate. If you don't get in with the full story, and if you don't model it with your own cherished love for your spouse, if possible, then afterwards, it's harder for kids. And kids make mistakes when possibly they could have avoided it. Doesn't mean kids will always avoid mistakes, but we can do our best to arm them. And lots of nice stories, you know, about parents being determined to have the conversations with their kids. I remember one where one dad was saying his wife was expecting, the boy was in 5th class, he realised the window's closing here, I've got to get in before this guy's 12 or something. The advice we were normally giving parents is make sure you have your kids really know the facts of life clearly in a very, you don't have to be graphic, but in a clear way by the time they're about 10. And if you don't get in first, somebody else will, and there'll be damage. I mean, sometimes there's kids who are, year 3 talking about the cars, and mum's face goes red, right? It's amazing. But this guy's wife is expecting, so he thinks he's going to talk to his son, and so he says to his boy, mate, let's talk about where babies come from. And the boy says to his dad, it's okay, Dad, I know all about that. Now, Dad worked up a lot of courage to ask that question, right? But to his credit, he didn't give up. He straight away said to the boy, oh, mate, that's great, tell me about it. And then the boy went wobbly, and then he says to his father, oh, Dad, run it past me again. Have another go at it, don't give up, right? Because if you don't get in, somebody else will. And then they will get a very limited story, and they will sit in judgment on mum and dad wrongly, etc., etc. Big issue. How do you pass on your faith to your kids? We had Bishop Anthony Fisher, now moved to Sydney, come and talk to the boys. And one of the things he said was, he sees his mission. This is when he was in Parramatta, and if you know Parramatta are the eels, right? So he said, my mission here in this diocese is to turn eels into saints. But in the end, we've got to get that message through to kids. If kids don't learn that they're called to be saints, to be holy at home, they're certainly not going to believe it if someone else tells them. They've got to learn it from home. And that really puts the heat on us, doesn't it? And if you want your kids to be striving for holiness, that means you have to be striving to live a deep life of prayer and a deep sacramental life. And if we don't strive for that, we can't ask that of the kids. And the kids will be under-equipped then, because it's from the sacraments we draw our strength. This is a beautiful insight that John Paul gave us in one of his last encyclicals. From the sacraments we draw our strength. And it's not something we should be scared of. A couple of very nice stories. One of the boys, one of the very, I'm sorry I keep talking about boys, because most of my time teaching has been in boys' schools in recent years. I will try and degender it. But this very forthright parent with a bit of a temper is screaming at a client on the phone one night at home. He's an architect, and the client has let him down, and the guy is very angry and he's using very choice language. And then his son, he realises, is in the room looking at him, 10 years old. And the boy turns around and walks out. Dad feels pretty bad. Then on Sunday at Mass, there were confessions in one of the confessionals. And the boy's standing next to his father. He says, "Dad, are you going to confession?" And Dad says to the boy, Dad's a great guy. He says, "Do you think I need to?" And the boy goes, and then the kid says, "I'll go with you if it helps." That's fantastic. Isn't that wonderful? Another one of our old boys was going on an overseas trip, and his dad said to him, "Mate, I think it's a really good idea if you go to confession before you go on the trip and get on the plane and everything. I'll take you down there on Saturday if you like." So, kid agrees. They drive down to confession at the parish on Saturday, and then car stops. Boy's about to get out, and then the boy turns to his dad and says, "You're coming too, aren't you?" Dad didn't plan to, but he did. Isn't that nice? In the chapel at school, the boy walks out of the chapel beaming, really big smile. And I was walking along the balcony with somebody visiting the school. I said, "Hey, mate, what's up?" And he just sort of said, "I've been to confession." But in the end, what's the message you're giving your kids about the sacrament of penance? Because remember, we got back to the face, remember what makes us joyful, etc. If what makes us joyful is the sacraments, that's the message the kids are going to take. But if it's hard work for us and we show it, of course the kids aren't going to like it. It's going to be like Mondays, which is another story too. Right? We have to teach kids to love work, not avoid it, not look forward to the weekend. Another story. Next. Oh, that's, tangible things. That's when the World Youth Day Cross was here years ago now. But tangible things that your family does. What are the decorations around home that you treasure, that have some connection with our faith? These sort of things, particularly with smaller kids, are so important. But it's amazing how that experience changed a lot of kids. It's very beautiful. That's something that Pope John Paul wrote to us when he had the Synod on Oceania. So when God is no longer at the centre of human life, and life itself becomes empty and meaningless. That young man, by the way, true story, he's no boy. This young guy, his name's Pat, he wouldn't mind me saying this. He loved his surfing, and up until year 10, no teacher would have given him a chance of getting above 80 in his ATAR. He wasn't that highly motivated when it came to his studies, right? At the start of year 11, he put onto his wall 99. And his dad said to him, "Oh, mate, I'm not sure about that. I don't want you to be disappointed. You really reckon that's realistic?" And he said, "Dad, I've got to have a goal." And he got 98.6. Isn't it amazing when you teach kids to set goals for themselves, how they take over? You've got to teach your kids to set goals for themselves. Don't tell teenagers what goals they should have. Help them to set their own goals. Otherwise, they're going to be victims all through their life. I think we're almost finished the first part. Sorry, good story to finish. This young man is one of Australia's youngest priests, a guy called Dan McCann. Daniel came in as a seminarian on that day to talk to the boys in year 12. And one of the boys put up his hand and said, Dan, why did you want to become a priest? And Dan says, when I was 6 years old, my father said to me, Dan, why don't you pray every day asking God to show you what he wants you to do in life? He didn't say pray to be a priest. Just ask to know where your life is meant to go. And Dan was a really good kid, and I would see him very often in the chapel at school praying. Even at lunchtime, I'm thinking, Dan, come and get a life. And it was my problem. He was doing the right thing. And he said one day, he's explained to the boys, one day when I'd been to Mass at school, I just received Holy Communion. I was doing my Thanksgiving, and I felt this overwhelming sense of peace that I was meant to be a priest. And I've never doubted it since. And the kids were very respectfully listening, right? He told the story again afterwards after he was ordained, but he said Mass at the school and said this in the homily. And then he said, and I was sitting just there when I thought that. And the kid's sitting there. It's crazy, isn't it? But Dan, if you saw the massive inauguration of Pope Francis, Daniel was the guy who sang the responsorial psalm in front of 1 billion people. And he was the guy who brought up the Pope's ring in front of 1 billion people. Isn't that amazing? All because his father had the wisdom to talk to a 6-year-old with that depth. And obviously with, prayers and things. But what are your home habits like in terms of prayers? At one of the infant schools in Sydney where some of the families have their kids, they have the habit of saying a decade of the Rosary, and they'll put intentions around the class. And one of the parents knew this. So that night at home they're saying a decade of the Rosary or prayer or something, I don't know. And he says to his son, what are we going to pray this prayer for? And the boy straight away says, we'll pray for the conversion of Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
And his father does exactly what you did. He laughed. And then the boy turns to his father and he says, don't you believe that prayer can change Lady Gaga?